I think we're live. Super excited to have Lucas from the Aave team today as our guest on today's podcast, webinar, whatever you want to call it. Maybe we should call it fireside chat. So Lucas, how are you today?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing very well. It's just 8 a.m. for us, so just getting the day started. But it is my third call, so we've had a busy day, and I think all of us are very busy times these days, especially the crypto market. So let's get started. Let's tell us a bit about your background, how you got into the space, and how you landed at Aave.
So my background is not crypto at all, actually. I've been in hardware development for a while, and then I did some MQTT stuff on the web and discovered, I think, Emilio doing things on Atlant at GitHub in the open, and I just thought it was cool what they did, like in 2017, I think. And then I started following them, watching what they do, and got into web development. And then fast forward to 2019. No, actually, beginning of 2020, I think. I saw that they launched Aave, and I thought that, like, it's super interesting what they do, and with all the data we have on blockchain, things are not very transparent still. So I started building Aave Watch, which is kind of a monitoring platform for seeing like what goes on under the hood inside the Aave protocol, like on flash loans, transactions, like everything. And then, midst of Corona, I wanted to switch like the field I'm working in. And I've been in contact with Stani before, and he was super nice. And so I thought, like, perhaps that's a job I want to work with. And I applied. And now I'm in crypto since, I think, November last year. So I'm really new to the whole space.
So just curious, you said you were in a different field. What was that field? So that's not crypto before you switched to crypto. Is that right?
Yeah, it's not crypto. It's actually digital recruiting, perhaps. You could call it like that. So I worked for a company which does job matching for mostly lawyers, also other jobs nowadays. But yeah, they started off with lawyers. And so it was like just database and web development, but not related to crypto at all. Like not even really related to finance, I'd say.
Very cool. I think, to be honest, that's where the best ideas come from. People with fresh perspectives, because people in the field, they're almost pigeonholed into their line of thinking. So fresh ideas, diversity ideas, new viewpoints. I think that's very important.
I think there's some truth to it, but also like the crypto field is like gigantic and it's overwhelming a bit. So I think it also has like a lot of benefits when you're in there for a while and you just know the stuff. Because in backstage I just said like for me it's sometimes opening up Twitter or React headquarters and like there's so much new stuff I never heard before, and I could spend days and weeks with just like reading what all the new things are there. So yeah, I think it both has its advantages and disadvantages.
So you're a software engineer at Aave today, is that correct? Okay, so day to day, can you walk us through what are you working on? If you can share, is it like the smart contract side? Is it on the UI side? Is it back office stuff? Like, what is it that you work on?
I'm not working on smart contracts. So I think my position is called full stack, but not smart contracts. So I do a little front end work, not design, but yeah, like the other stuff in the front end that we have to do. And also I've been involved in building APIs for the data we have into the subgraph development we have there with the graph. Yeah, this mostly is so like in the recent months I've been working on an API for providing liquidation data and yeah, adding features to the graph now for AMM, which we launched yesterday. Yeah, so a bit of everything except smart contracts.
Very cool. Okay, so let's jump into your Aave Watch. So this is a project that you built in your spare time before you even got involved with Aave. And that was essentially your route to getting a job at Aave. Of course, you are very well qualified, but essentially, that is essentially that's how you prove that you're able to build something meaningful, something valuable to the community, and you're able to show those behaviors, which makes you a good fit for the team at Aave. So let's talk about this. How did you get this idea? How did you conceptualize it? What were the first steps that you did? Like, let's just walk through that story there.
As I said, like I was monitoring mostly Emilio on GitHub, and I just saw when they launched Aave. I wasn't really involved in Lend, so yeah, and then like I read what they do, and I thought it's super interesting. And then like the next question that was popping up in my mind is like, how many people are actually using this? So it's a cool protocol. Like I think for the DeFi, they've been one of the best user interfaces out there. So it was like a huge step forward, I think, in crypto when they initially launched. But yeah, there are always concerns like how much use is this platform? Like, do people trust it? And I tried to figure out this data, and it's not straightforward. Because in Aave you have these lending pools, then inside the lending pools you have the different assets, and then you have different holders of these assets, and people can borrow it. And so just to figure out like how many addresses have interacted with Aave, it's not very easy, I'd say, on a smart contract level. And so what I started off doing is I used the APIs and just Web3, and I started crawling the data and writing it into MongoDB. And then as I had it in MongoDB, like these are the tools that I'm familiar with. So I started analyzing this and building charts. Yeah, just putting real-time data into the website, and showed it on Twitter, and there was like a lot of positive feedback, and so I started building stuff around. So at some point there were push notifications whenever there was a flash flow, and I think above $10,000 or something. Like, this is now on a daily level, multiple 100 times perhaps. But yeah, at the beginning, these were like big steps when something like this happened, because it meant like there was at least one developer integrating with flash loans. And I think like flash loans at the time, they were brand new and just a very cool new feature. But it's hard to understand like what the usage of these features is and how people are using it, like figuring out the transactions. And yeah, so this was essentially the start and the idea of it, and just like the positive feedback by folks like Stani, but also Andre, and I think Alex, you had an interview with like a week or two ago. Like, she helped me a lot, like via Telegram, and reached out if I could add this or do this differently. And it was just a very like welcoming feedback group with the developers at Aave. And so it just was fun, and I had fun sticking to it and continuing with it. So yeah.
Okay, very cool. And then, so your stack was, you had essentially either a WebSocket or Polar or some kind of cron job that reads from an Infura endpoint, and you copy that data to MongoDB, and then you decode those log events using the API, and then you're able to run simple MongoDB style aggregation queries on top of that database to create the charts. Is that roughly how it worked?
Yeah, it's exactly how it worked. So okay. I had a little app engine on Google Cloud, I think, which just had a cron job running every half hour or something, and it crawled like all the new events on the contracts I was monitoring. Obviously, I wasn't monitoring everything at the time, but I evolved over time, and I wrote this to MongoDB, and then I had like I think I started with Great React App or something, like I had some web boilerplates, and I just like piped in the data and visualized it somehow.
Okay, very cool. And then at what point did it fall over when you realized that this architecture does not really scale? Or did that ever happen, or you decided to rebuild this stack?
Yeah, I had very little experience with the smart contracts, to be honest. Like I still lack a lot of experience with the smart contracts, and so for me, it sometimes was hard to pick the correct addresses and watch the right stuff. At some point, I think I wrote the Aave team in a chat like, yeah, this and that, and there's again like stuff missing. What am I doing wrong? And then one of the developers there wrote me like, yeah, we also now provide this subgraph on the graph, and you can just use this, and there's even a WebSocket, and you can subscribe to events, and we also now provide the Aave protocol JavaScript library, and you can use this to calculate stuff on top of the data we provide in the graph. And I looked at it, and it basically provided everything I needed, and I wanted but in a much easier way. Also, adoption of Aave increased, like there were more users, there were more events, flash loans got used more often. So I hit limits at Infura sometimes. So yeah, I didn't want to pay money, so I made the switch at some point, and yeah, it worked relatively good, I'd say.
Awesome. And let's talk through that. So someone else had written the subgraph for you, is that correct? Someone at Aave had already written the subgraph, or did you write the subgraph?
So the initial subgraph, I think it was written by Andre, which is one of the Genesis team Aave developers. And I think I'm not sure if it's just Andre, like multiple developers at Aave, they developed it for the user interface actually. So it's also used within Aave. And they said it's like for public usage, and I think it's now also in the docs. So if anyone is developing on Aave, you can just have a look at it, and it's constantly evolved.
Okay, and then what was your experience switching to that? Did you have to understand the schemas with the documentation? I'm curious to learn from a user perspective. If someone else has already written the subgraph, what is the learning curve that you had to go through, or was it mostly just straightforward?
I'd say it's mixed. Like I've been involved a lot in GraphQL before. So my first web developer job was at MVP Space, a startup in London, and they used a lot of Meteor. And Meteor at some point, like the team pivoted to Apollo, which is now one of the most known GraphQL libraries, I think. And so I had a lot of experience with GraphQL already, and with the Schema Explorer, with generating types and stuff from the GraphQL schema. So this was not like a big burden for me, I'd say. But fixing and adding stuff in the graph. Like at the time, it was confusing for me because in the graph you use assembly script which I never have touched before, and testing is kind of hard within the graph. And I think it's actually getting more and more complicated with the growing protocol, because there's more data you have to index. And so things just get slower. You don't have like a very nice feedback loop anymore if you have to wait 10 hours or 20 hours for a subgraph to resync. Yeah, so it's perhaps not the easiest to use interface to start with, because it's GraphQL, and you have to get used to using post messages instead of get. So it's not really a REST. But at the other hand, you already have the GraphQL schema and the schema explorer, and cool tools like GraphQL CodeGen or GenQL, where you can just like pipe in the subgraph, like any GraphQL interface, and then generate your JavaScript or TypeScript code from it.
Okay, very cool. And what's next for Aave Watch? Is there so let me ask you, Professor, a question. So these are mostly log events that are being indexed. Is there any use case at any point where you need the data that's inside the contract state that is not necessarily exposed to the log events?
Oh yeah, there are actually a lot of cases where you would rather want the current state than the log event. And that's just because like the A token, it's constantly increasing. Now we don't really have events for that. So what we do at the moment is we have a growth based index on the contracts. We also have this in the subgraph. So what we do then is we try to replicate what happens on the blockchain within Aave protocol.js. But it's obviously that's a lot of work. It's work you have to do somewhere. Like if you do it on the client, you have to have big number JS or something on the client, like uploading client bundles and perhaps like decreasing user experience of stuff. And it's also not entirely straightforward. Like if you look at the protocol.js Aave GitHub repository, you see that like this library is now like more than a year old, and still we sometimes like fix little edge cases of stuff where it was not necessarily straightforward to replicate what we have in the smart contracts than in a JavaScript library. Or this is the easy example actually, so just to calculate the A token balance. But what is more complicated is, for example, reading health factors, because the health factor of a user, like it's dependent on all the reserves he has. So what you need to calculate it from outdated data is to get like the new prices, get at least a certain point in time of the user reserves. Then you have to calculate what the user reserve now looks like with added interest. And then calculate the health factor with current prices of reserves. So there's like multiple levels of things you have to fix if you don't have access to current blockchain data. And that's kind of complicated, I'd say.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. So if someone is entering this space, what would you recommend? Is there a recipe for someone to, or a set of resources to level up, to, like you've gone through a pretty steep learning curve over the last, I would say, November to now is like 4 or 5 months. Is there a place people can go to learn about the space, about the data, the contracts, all that kind of stuff?
To be honest, I don't really know. So I did a lot of learning by doing. I didn't do any. Actually, I did a course on smart contract development. Like I can't tell you which one, but I just googled a bit and did some of the tutorials and stuff, setting up my ganache and things like that. And I don't use this in my work time at the moment, but it helps me to understand. Like sometimes, for example, if I fix something in Aave.js, it makes sense to look at the contracts and understand what is done there. And this doesn't mean that I have to write smart contract code or deploy something, but it's good to have like a basic understanding of things. So yeah, I cannot really like guide you to some resource on where to learn or what to learn. But I think it's always good if you have like a project like Aave, but also can be anything else like Curve, whatever, which you're curious about. And then I think if you're curious about a project and the community in and around the project is welcoming, there's always good chances that the people lead you to the right way. And if you have like in hackathons a good idea, there's always support from people who know where you can find information on specific topics. Like I said, when I built Aave, I didn't know a lot of things, and just because I tried, people from Aave reached out and helped me with things I didn't manage to do on myself.
Very cool. Okay, so let's jump into something you're working on right now. What is perhaps the most challenging or the most difficult task that you've overcome in the last couple, like let's say the last 2 weeks? What is the hardest thing you've worked on?
So yesterday we released the AMM market, and this was like a quite deep integration into our user interface. And I didn't do a lot of things there before. So like for me, this was very challenging. But for me, the most challenging part actually at working at Aave or generally in blockchain at the moment is to not get sidetracked too much by other stuff. Because we have stand-ups and things like that. And then when people talk about Sybil, for example, we had the integration with Sybil a few weeks ago. Like I don't know what this is, although a lot of people probably know what it is. And then you start looking into it, and I think it's like the most challenging thing when being new to the space is to not get sidetracked by all the cool other stuff there is.
Very cool. Do you have any questions for us at Covalent? We are a data provider. You know how we're thinking about it. I think it'll be interesting to switch roles here, and you can ask me any question. I'm obviously the founder of the project. I've been around for 3.5 years. So anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, I'm actually wondering how you guys achieve reading the current block events. Not only the events, but the current block state of things. Because I think I saw on Twitter, correct me if I'm wrong, but someone wrote about the wet subgraph that they needed like, I don't know, 22 days to sync or something. And then someone, perhaps you posted underneath, on Covalent, this takes like this and that seconds. Just curious, like
milliseconds.
How this can work at a database level, like what's the architecture?
Sure, absolutely. It's a great question, and I can deep dive into this because this is what I've been cutting my teeth on at least for the last decade. So I have a lot of experience in this stuff. So traditionally, data pipelines, there are two paradigms. There's an extract, transform, load. So you extract data from the blockchain, transform that data, and then load it into another database, and then you query that database, which is the transform data. So that is the paradigm that the graph uses. So you extract using Web3 calls, you create the transformations using subgraph, and then you load it to a database, and then you query that using GraphQL. It's a very standard approach. It's been around for 35, 40 years since the advent of databases. So nothing nothing magical there. With what has happened over the last decade is the ELT paradigm has started to take over, which means you extract and load the entire raw data, and then you perform the transformation at query time. So from an architecture standpoint, the way you can understand Covalent versus the graph is that Covalent has a database with the entire replica of the blockchain information. So it's just this massive database with 100 billion rows, which indexes every single account, every single transaction, every single log event, everything. That's a perfect replica of the blockchain. And then it's up to you, the developer, to basically slice and do those transformations on top of that raw data to whatever level of granularity that you have. So that is basically our philosophy. So now what we do is it's interesting you bring up MongoDB. So we have a transformation language, which is an exact copy of MongoDB that we've implemented in-house on top of Postgres. So our Postgres database is like a hybrid Postgres blockchain node. So it's always synchronized within 2 block heights. So 30 seconds is the latency. So the entire blockchain is copied. So all of our customers, they are also queries from that central database. We have like over 100 customers, everyone from 0x to Zapper to Zerion, Chain Guardians, NFTX, just like all of different use cases in the taxation space, in the exchange space, in the wallet space, and so on. And then if the pipeline stalls, all of them are affected, unlike each subgraph being stale or whatever that issues are. And then from there, you create either, so we have something called a Class A endpoint, where get your ERC20 balances, for example, which means that we're able to scan through all of the ERC20 contracts, which is 200,000, there are 200,000 contracts, and then find out if your address is in the balances map. And we can do that scan in about 300 milliseconds. So that's an example of the power of Covalent by having this central database. So that's really the architecture there. Now, there's a lot of custom code that has gone into the database side. We don't use the general RPC layer on GET because the RPC layer itself is very slow for this kind of batch exports. And then the API layer, we re-implemented MongoDB. So for example, if you hit our transactions endpoint, not only does this get you the list of transactions, it also gets you the log events joined into every transaction. But because we also have the APIs, we have a 40,000 API items on our site, we're able to decode these log events. So now you have the transactions plus the log events that's fully decoded. So if you have a transfer event, we basically return a JSON document with all of the indexed fields and also the data field. And then you can then transform this data using Primer, which is our MongoDB clone, to do aggregation, filters, sorting, projection, any kind of transformation out of that thing. So one use case that comes to mind is DAO Maker as an example of a token issuance platform, and they're trying to figure out tokens that are sold or that interacted with an exchange, and then what the holding period of these tokens are with the wallet. So basically what they do is they do a filter based on one of the exchanges on Uniswap, and then they figure out what the holding period is depending on the timestamps. So that's just an example. So that opens up the breadth of usabilities. So here, if you have an event log, if you want to use Aave Watch with Covalent, you don't have to write subgraphs. You don't have to do any of this stuff. Basically, you go to our log events endpoint, and then you're given the contract address and then the topic hash, and then boom, it just starts streaming all of the log events fully decoded. So there's no need for even APIs on your side. And then from there, we actually have Primer. We haven't really announced Primer yet, but Primer is actually very powerful. Not only can you filter and sort and project and that kind of stuff, also logical operators, it's very powerful. It's like MongoDB, it's literally that. You can also do aggregation by timestamp. So for example, if you have a time series for interest rates for one of the money markets, and obviously if it's snapshotted every block, that's every 15 seconds, that's too much data. But you want to find out an average over the last hour for the last 30 days, then that gives you, all of that can be done on the query side with 0 lines of extra code that you need to write. So that's really our philosophy when it comes to blockchains, and this is why we're having so much success, because not only do you not have to invest time in writing the subgraph, which could take anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks. In terms of when you change the schema of the subgraph, you have to resync it, and in some cases that could take a couple of days. Which in the case of Covalent, the schema change is done at query time. Like there's no, like the schema is exactly a replica of the blockchain. So that's why we don't have roles like curation steps. You don't have any of the stuff because there's no need for curation. The data that's in Covalent is exactly what is on the blockchain. It's already curated information. The contract developer has designed something and has picked a set of events to expose. So that is one level. What is coming next? It's interesting you asked this, is contract state. So this is coming in Q2. So the way, when I talked about our blockchain node and our Postgres being like a mythical beast,
yeah.
What is happening is we're actually able to replay every smart contract execution to capture internal storage, all of the storage rights. So we're able to snapshot the state, the fully decoded state of every single smart contract and output it as a JSON document. So now if you want to find out all of the token holders as of a particular block height, it's literally one API call. So Covalent right now has an endpoint. Here's an example. For example, the social token got hacked over the weekend. You roll HQ like $5.5 million got lost. So we stepped in and started helping these communities with their data, essentially snapshot of the token balances before the hack, so that they can create a new token and replicate the balances of the token holders, and then issue this new token and do a swap, right? So you would basically cut out the hacker. And so we helped with all of that data. And so we're able to capture that contract state as of any block height, just as a JSON document. And this is agnostic to the contract or the data structures. We basically export the type maps from Solidity and map that to the EVM so that we're able to snapshot these JSON documents. And then once they're JSON documents, then it's up to you to use Primer to either do a filtering or sorting on the JSON document or do a time series where you're tracking up a certain balance or something of that sort. So things like health factors, things that are stored in the storage of the smart contract is available to you in a single API call, either at a point in time or as a time series or aggregated, all built into Primer. So yeah, so it's a rethinking of the entire architecture from the ground up. That's why it's taken us three and a half years to get to where we are. It's been a lot of trial and error on our side. So I think that gives you a preview to what we're up to, and that's just contract data. The NFT stuff is just a giant mess. So we spend a lot of time on the NFT space, and basically every NFT space in the NFT project in the space is using Covalent today. We're actually sponsoring NFT hacks later this weekend. So this weekend, so please partake if you. So they have two venues. They have one for developers and they have one for creatives. So there, basically you can come in and get all of the token IDs within a smart contract, right? So that's an example where you need to scan the blockchain. Get your NFT balances. So for example, DApp Radar, a lot of projects out there. Just the list of your ERC 721s and 1155s. That's such a difficult problem. So we solved that again in sub-second response times because we're able to scan the blockchain. Things like sale prices. This is a very cool example where we want to build a dashboard, just like CoinMarketCap. Let's call it NFT market cap, which is basically the last sold price on one of these exchanges like Zora or OpenSea or Rarible times the supply of the contract. So if it's 721, it supplies one. If it's a 1155, you have multiple units, and you can build essentially a market cap of the NFTs. So yeah, lots of things that's going on in the background. But yeah, that gives you a preview to. I know you were probably looking for a small answer, but I gave you a full lecture on Covalent.
I think it's actually it's quite interesting. I imagine all these scales, and because it's just a massive amount of data. Like I think this is one of the biggest differences probably to something like the graph, because the graph in essence you could self-host it, and it just stores the events of this one contract you want to watch, or like multiple contracts you want to watch. And with Covalent, you have like terabytes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the magic here is that exact same API, all you have to do is change the chain ID, and now it's supported in about half a dozen other blockchains, right? So this is why we have so much traction on Binance Smart Chain, so much traction on Matic. We announced a partnership with Avalanche yesterday. So we have a hackathon called 1 Million Wallets. So we inspire and incentivize developers to build really cool interfaces on top of these APIs. So yeah, there's a lot going on. I think I'm very, very passionate about this space. And besides the whole like business, trying to make money and all that stuff, fundraising, hiring and all that stuff. For me personally, the dungeon data, which is what this thing is, like a personal favorite of mine. So these are the things that we do to teach people how to crunch data. So that's like a longer career arc for me, because that's where my true passion lies. But the whole company, like money making and all that stuff, is just a means to an end, so that we can do the fun stuff that we're actually excited about.
That sounds good.
Cool. Okay, so I have no further questions. Lucas, any final closing thoughts? Something you want to share about Aave? You definitely want to do a shout out that you're recruiting, of course.
Sorry, I didn't understand the last.
So any last messages you want to share with the community? Some announcements that you could share, or where people can find you, happy to get in touch with you. If you have feedback on Aave Watch, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, then let's start from back to forth. So I'm on Twitter. You will find me, I guess. It's Sakustra there. Final thoughts. I think this dungeons data thing is like super cool if you're interested in data analytics. Like I think these analytics of things you're passionate about, if it's Aave or something else, like that's just super interesting to work on this. And if you manage to build some cool dashboard of it, like even with Aave Watch, there are nowadays I think there are 3 or 4 others who do similar things, and they do it better to some distinct in some parts, like time series data for rates and stuff. And there's a lot of things you can do, things that you can do. Yeah, I think if you're passionate about anything, like it's fun to build something. I really like. I enjoyed building Aave Watch. I'm currently building like a kind of a new version of it with a little different architecture. But yeah, so if you're passionate about such things, build them, share them on Twitter, like tag the teams you're building them for, and usually they involve you. I'd say like every good community will involve you into their community, and then it's just a very nice experience. Like it's fun. Regarding Aave, I obviously can't spoiler anything here. But if you watch the GitHub of Aave, you will see that there are obviously always some smaller things leaked, perhaps. There's a lot of cool things coming. Perhaps even in the coming weeks.
Okay, very cool, exciting stuff. All right, Lucas, that's it from our side. Thank you so much for your generosity and sharing your insights and your thoughts with the community. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very happy to have this discussion. Well, see you around. Take care. Bye.
See you then. Bye.